She was fired from her job because she was pregnant, but no one expected her husband to become the new head of the company. Subscribe to the channel and post in the comments where you're watching us from. Amelia Johnson walked into the sleek, glass-walled office building of Arctech Dynamics with the same quiet determination she brought to every day of her career. She had worked here for over a decade, carving out a reputation as one of the company's most reliable and innovative analysts. At 35, Amelia was known not just for her sharp mind and work ethic, but for the kindness she extended to everyone around her. Her ability to stay composed under pressure and offer support to colleagues had earned her widespread respect, even admiration among the staff. But despite her talents and accomplishments, Amelia was used to being overlooked. The company's culture, shaped by its CEO, Richard Hudson, was cold and hierarchical. Promotions and recognition were often handed out based on favoritism, and people who didn't fit Richard's narrow vision of success, particularly women and minorities, were rarely given the credit they deserved. Amelia had learned early on that she would have to work twice as hard just to be seen as an equal, and she had accepted this burden without complaint. The office itself was a reflection of the corporate atmosphere. Towering windows offered stunning views of the city skyline, but inside, the gray carpets, sterile white walls, and harsh fluorescent lighting created a sense of detachment. Employees moved through the halls with hurried steps, avoiding eye contact, their faces etched with the quiet anxiety of people who knew they were being constantly evaluated. The only warmth in the building seemed to radiate from Amelia's corner of the open-plan workspace. Her desk, tucked near the windows, was covered with personal touches: a small potted plant, a framed photo of her husband Marcus, and a collection of handwritten thank you notes from colleagues she had helped over the years. Amelia's day began like any other. She greeted her co-workers with a bright smile as she settled into her chair, sipping from her favorite ceramic mug, a gift from her best friend at work. Today's workload was heavier than usual, with 2 major reports due by the end of the week. But Amelia thrived on challenges. She dived into the data, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pieced together trends and insights that would shape the company's strategy for months to come. Across the office, Richard Hudson observed the activity from his corner office, a luxurious space lined with dark wood panels and leather furniture. The contrast between his domain and the open workspace was stark. Richard, a tall, middle-aged man with a commanding presence, exuded an air of superiority that made employees nervous in his presence. He liked it that way. To Richard, leadership was about control, and he maintained his authority by keeping people on edge. His sharp blue eyes scanned the floor, lingering momentarily on Amelia's desk. Amelia was one of his most productive employees, but he would never admit it. In his mind, she didn't belong at the forefront of the company. Her ideas, no matter how brilliant, were often dismissed or appropriated by others. He had perfected the art of subtly undermining her, overlooking her in meetings, assigning her impossible deadlines, and crediting others for her successes. It wasn't personal, he told himself, it was business. But deep down, Richard knew his biases played a role in how he treated her, and he didn't care. The tension between Amelia and Richard wasn't lost on her colleagues. They admired Amelia, but were cautious about aligning themselves too closely with her. They had seen how Richard punished dissent and rewarded loyalty, and most of them were too afraid to challenge the status quo. Still, a few of them tried to show their support in small ways, offering her coffee during late nights or leaving her those heartfelt thank you notes. It was their way of acknowledging her contributions without risking their own positions. As the morning wore on, Amelia received an email summoning her to a team meeting in the main conference room. She quickly gathered her materials and made her way to the large glass-walled space where the senior managers often convened. The meeting was led by Richard himself, who sat at the head of the table in his imposing leather chair. He started with a few updates about the company's performance before opening the floor for ideas on improving efficiency. Amelia hesitated, knowing how these sessions usually went, but she had spent weeks developing a proposal she believed could revolutionize the company's approach to client relations. Summoning her courage, she raised her hand. Richard's gaze turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Amelia?" She presented her idea clearly and confidently, outlining the key benefits and demonstrating the potential cost savings with the help of a detailed chart she had prepared. As she spoke, she noticed a few colleagues nodding in agreement, their eyes lighting up at the prospect of a new approach. But Richard's face remained impassive. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Well, that's interesting," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "But I'm not sure it's practical. We'll table it for now." Amelia felt her stomach sink, but she maintained her composure. She had expected this reaction, but it still stung. After the meeting, one of her colleagues approached her quietly and whispered, "It was a great idea, Amelia. Don't let him get to you." "Thanks," she replied with a faint smile, though her heart wasn't in it. She returned to her desk, determined to keep pushing forward despite the obstacles. That evening, as she packed up her things to head home, she thought about how much she loved her work, not because of the company, but because of the people she worked with and the impact she knew her ideas could have. She refused to let Richard's dismissiveness define her worth. What she didn't realize was that her resolve was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The following weeks at Arctech Dynamics unfolded like a slow-building storm, with tension mounting between Amelia Johnson and her CEO, Richard Hudson. Despite her unrelenting professionalism, it was becoming clear that Richard was growing increasingly uncomfortable with her presence in the company. Amelia had never been one to seek the spotlight, but her consistent ability to deliver results made it impossible for her work to go unnoticed by her peers, her clients, and even the senior leadership team. For someone like Richard, who valued control above all else, this was a problem. The first crack in their already strained relationship came during a high-stakes project review. Amelia had been tasked with analyzing the performance of a recently launched product line, a job that required her to comb through months of data and identify patterns that could inform the company's next steps. She had worked tirelessly on the report, often staying late into the evening to ensure every detail was accounted for. By the time she presented her findings to the leadership team, her analysis was not only thorough but groundbreaking, offering insights that no one else had anticipated. The room was silent as she concluded her presentation, her final slide displaying a concise list of actionable recommendations. A few of her colleagues exchanged impressed glances, and one even started to applaud before stopping abruptly, perhaps reminded of who was sitting at the head of the table. Richard Hudson leaned forward in his chair, his fingers steepled as he studied Amelia with a calculating gaze. "That's quite the analysis," he said, his tone deceptively neutral. "Though I wonder if you've considered the potential risks of implementing these changes. It's easy to make assumptions when you're focused solely on the data." Amelia's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I've accounted for those risks," she replied, gesturing to a supplemental slide. "This section outlines contingency plans for each scenario." Richard didn't even glance at the slide. Instead, he shifted his attention to another manager. "David, what do you think? Is this something we can realistically pursue?" David, a younger manager who had recently been promoted under Richard's mentorship, hesitated. He glanced at Amelia apologetically before nodding. "It's a solid concept, but I agree we'd need to weigh the risks more carefully." The conversation quickly shifted away from Amelia's proposal, with Richard steering it toward a less innovative but safer alternative suggested by another team. Amelia sat silently, her hands folded in her lap as the meeting continued without her. When it finally ended, she gathered her materials and left the room, her jaw clenched in frustration. This pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Whenever Amelia introduced a new idea or presented the results of her work, Richard would find a way to undermine her. He would question her methods, redirect the conversation, or simply dismiss her contributions altogether. It was clear to everyone in the room what was happening, but no one dared to speak up. Richard had a way of silencing dissent, and his reputation for retaliating against those who crossed him was well known. One day, Amelia found herself the subject of one of Richard's more overt power plays. She had been working on a collaborative project with a colleague named Jenna, who had recently joined the team. Jenna was bright and enthusiastic, but inexperienced, and she had leaned heavily on Amelia for guidance throughout the project. Together, they had developed a proposal that had the potential to streamline the company's supply chain, reducing costs significantly. When the time came to present the proposal, Richard surprised everyone by asking Jenna to lead the presentation. Amelia watched from her seat as Jenna stumbled through the slides, clearly unprepared for the questions that followed. Richard let her flounder for a few painful minutes before stepping in. "Well, it's an interesting start," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "but it seems like this could have used a bit more oversight." Amelia clenched her fists under the table but said nothing. She knew that speaking up would only make things worse, for herself and for Jenna. When the meeting ended, she pulled Jenna aside to reassure her. "You did your best," Amelia said gently. "Don't let this shake your confidence. We'll get through it." Jenna nodded, though her eyes were filled with tears. "Thanks, Amelia. I don't know how you do it." Amelia didn't have an answer for that. She was beginning to wonder herself. Her breaking point came during a one-on-one meeting with Richard. He had called her into his office to discuss her performance, a rare occurrence that immediately set her on edge. His office, with its dark wood paneling and leather furniture, was a stark contrast to the sterile cubicles where most of the employees worked. It was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. Richard wasted no time getting to the point. "Amelia, I've noticed a pattern lately. You seem to have trouble aligning with the company's strategic direction." Amelia blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry if that's the impression I've given, but I've always done my best to support the company's goals." "That may be true," Richard said, leaning back in his chair, "but sometimes your enthusiasm can come across as disruptive. It's important to remember your role in the bigger picture." Amelia felt her stomach churn. She knew what he was doing, setting the stage for further marginalization, perhaps even an eventual dismissal. But she also knew she couldn't let him see her falter. "Understood," she said simply, her voice steady. The meeting ended shortly after, but the damage had been done. As Amelia returned to her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that her position at Arctech Dynamics was more precarious than ever. The support of her colleagues, as genuine as it was, wouldn't be enough to shield her from Richard's vendetta. If she wanted to survive in this environment, she would have to find a way to fight back, though how, she wasn't sure. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the office, Amelia sat alone at her desk, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. She wasn't ready to give up, but she also knew she couldn't keep enduring this forever. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice reminded her that change was possible, that she had the strength to overcome whatever lay ahead. But for now, all she could do was wait and hope that her perseverance would be enough. For Amelia Johnson, the news of her pregnancy was a beacon of light amidst the storm clouds gathering at work. She had discovered it one quiet evening at home, the faint pink lines on the test filling her with a mixture of joy, disbelief, and anticipation. When she shared the news with her husband, Marcus, his reaction was immediate and heartfelt. He lifted her into a hug, spinning her gently around their modest living room, his laughter echoing off the walls. "This is amazing, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be an incredible mother." Over the next few days, Amelia carried the secret close to her heart, savoring the knowledge that her life was about to change in a profound way. Work remained as demanding as ever, but she found herself smiling more often, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach whenever she paused at her desk. The thought of a new life growing inside her gave her a renewed sense of purpose and hope. She decided to share the news with her colleagues during the next team meeting, a routine gathering held every Monday morning in the main conference room. The meeting, as always, was led by Richard Hudson, who used it as an opportunity to assert his authority and set the tone for the week. Amelia arrived early, taking her usual seat near the middle of the table, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. As the meeting progressed, Amelia waited patiently for a natural pause in the discussion. When it came, she cleared her throat softly, drawing the attention of the room. "I'd like to take a moment to share some personal news," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm happy to announce that my husband and I are expecting our first child." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Colleagues turned to her with wide smiles, some clapping her on the shoulder, others offering warm congratulations. Jenna, sitting nearby, leaned over to whisper, "That's wonderful, Amelia. You're going to be amazing." For a brief moment, Amelia allowed herself to bask in the joy and support of her peers. But when she glanced toward the head of the table, her heart sank. Richard Hudson sat motionless in his leather chair, his hands clasped on the table in front of him. His expression was neutral, but his sharp blue eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker, disapproval, perhaps even annoyance. "Well," Richard said after a long pause, his voice cutting through the room like a cold wind, "Congratulations, Amelia. I'm sure this is an exciting time for you." The words were polite enough, but the tone was devoid of warmth. The applause and chatter faded quickly, the room falling into an uncomfortable silence. Richard's gaze lingered on Amelia for a moment longer before he shifted his attention back to the agenda, moving on as if nothing had happened. Amelia felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew Richard well enough to recognize when he was displeased, and it was clear her announcement had not been received as warmly as she had hoped. Still, she resolved not to let his reaction dampen her spirits. This was a moment of joy for her and Marcus, and she wouldn't let anyone take that away. Over the next few days, however, it became apparent that Richard's disapproval extended beyond his icy demeanor at the meeting. He began assigning Amelia more projects than usual, each one more demanding than the last. Deadlines were shortened, expectations raised, and every minor mistake scrutinized. It was as if he were testing her, pushing her to her limits in the hope that she would falter. Amelia confided in Marcus about the sudden increase in pressure at work. He listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every word. "It sounds like he's trying to force you out," Marcus said finally. "He can't come right out and fire you for being pregnant, so he's making it as difficult as possible for you to stay." Amelia nodded, her heart sinking. "I can't let him win, Marcus. I've worked so hard for this job. I won't let him take it away from me." But as the weeks went on, the strain began to take its toll. Amelia found herself working late into the night, often skipping meals and struggling to balance her responsibilities at work with the demands of her pregnancy. Her colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, offering words of encouragement and support when they could, but their help was limited. Most of them were too afraid of Richard to do anything more. One day, Amelia overheard a conversation between Richard and one of the senior managers in the hallway outside her office. She wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but their voices carried, and she couldn't help but listen. "We need to start thinking about how to handle this," Richard was saying, his tone low and serious. "Pregnant employees are a liability. It's not just the maternity leave. It's the lack of focus, the distractions. It's bad for business." The manager murmured something in response, but Amelia couldn't make out the words. She felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over her. Richard wasn't just unsupportive, he was actively plotting against her, viewing her pregnancy as a burden rather than a cause for celebration. That evening, as she sat on the couch with Marcus, Amelia let the tears she had been holding back finally fall. Marcus held her close, his arms wrapped tightly around her. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, his voice filled with determination. "You're not alone in this, Amelia. We'll fight this together." Amelia nodded, drawing strength from his words. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to protect the life she was building, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. Amelia Johnson knew things were getting worse, but she wasn't prepared for how quickly Richard Hudson would strike. For weeks, she had endured escalating pressure, tighter deadlines, more complex assignments, and constant scrutiny. It felt as though every move she made was being analyzed, waiting for her to stumble. Yet, Amelia pushed forward, her determination driven not just by her pride, but by the life growing inside her. She wouldn't let Richard take everything she had worked for. That Friday started like any other. The office buzzed with the low hum of keyboards and muted conversations as employees went about their routines. Amelia arrived early, as usual, her meticulous nature compelling her to stay ahead of the demands placed upon her. She greeted her colleagues with a polite smile, even as the exhaustion behind her eyes grew harder to hide. Around mid-morning, an email from Richard's assistant landed in her inbox. The subject line read simply, "Meeting invitation, 3 p.m., Richard Hudson's office." Amelia's stomach tightened. There was no context, no indication of the purpose of the meeting. Her instincts told her this wasn't good. Throughout the day, she tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the impending meeting. Colleagues noticed her distracted demeanor, offering sympathetic glances but saying little. No one dared to openly question Richard's decisions. By the time the clock struck 3 o'clock, Amelia's nerves were frayed. She took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her blouse, and walked to Richard's office. The hallway felt longer than usual, the sound of her footsteps echoing ominously. When she reached the large, dark wood door, she paused briefly before knocking. "Come in," Richard's voice called from the other side. Amelia opened the door to find him seated behind his massive desk, the faint scent of leather and cologne filling the room. The blinds were partially drawn, casting long shadows across the room, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. Richard gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat, Amelia," he said, his tone unreadable. She sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Richard leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he regarded her with a cold, calculating gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "I'll get straight to the point," Richard said finally, his voice clipped. "As you're aware, the company has been facing financial challenges in recent months. To address this, we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding staffing." Amelia's heart sank. She could feel the blood draining from her face as Richard continued. "After careful consideration, it's been decided that your position is no longer necessary. This is not a reflection of your performance," he added, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's purely a business decision." Amelia stared at him, struggling to process his words. After 10 years of unwavering dedication, she was being dismissed as if her contributions meant nothing. "I see," she managed to say, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "And this has nothing to do with my pregnancy?" Richard's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "As I said, this is a business decision. Personal circumstances are irrelevant." Amelia clenched her fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to argue, to point out the countless hours she had devoted to the company, the sacrifices she had made. But she knew it would be futile. Richard had already made up his mind. He slid a folder across the desk toward her. "These are your severance papers. You'll find the terms are more than fair. I trust you'll review them and return them signed by the end of the day." Amelia took the folder with shaking hands. She stood, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, and met Richard's gaze one last time. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, the words bitter in her mouth. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the office. As she made her way back to her desk, her colleagues looked up, their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy. Word spread quickly in an office like this, and it was clear they all knew what had just happened. Amelia avoided their gazes, focusing on the task of packing her belongings. The process felt surreal. She gathered the thank you notes, the photo of Marcus, and the small potted plant that had sat on her desk for years. Each item seemed to carry the weight of the memories she had built in this place. By the time she was finished, her box of belongings felt heavier than it should have. When she walked out of the office building for the last time, the sky was overcast, a light drizzle beginning to fall. She clutched the box to her chest as she stepped into the rain, the cold drops mixing with the tears streaming down her face. Her heart ached with a deep sense of betrayal and loss. She had given so much to Arctech Dynamics, and in return she had been discarded without a second thought. When she arrived home, Marcus was waiting for her. One look at her face, and he knew what had happened. He took the box from her hands, setting it gently on the floor, and pulled her into a tight embrace. "He fired me," Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. "He said it was just business, but we both know that's not true." Marcus held her as she cried, his own anger simmering beneath the surface. He hated seeing her like this, defeated, hurt, and questioning her worth. But as he comforted her, an idea began to take shape in his mind. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could fight for justice. for Amelia, for their family, and for everyone else who had suffered under Richard Hudson's leadership. That night, as they sat together in their cozy living room, the rain still pattering against the windows, Marcus took Amelia's hand. "We're not done, Amelia," he said firmly. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Though she didn't know what he meant at the time, his words planted a seed of hope in her heart. For the first time that day, Amelia allowed herself to believe that there might still be a way forward. The weeks that followed Amelia's dismissal were among the most challenging of her life. Every morning, she woke up with the same heavy feeling in her chest, a mix of anger, disappointment, and uncertainty about the future. She spent her days scouring job boards, sending out applications, and attending interviews. But time and again, her pregnancy proved to be an unspoken obstacle. Employers who had initially shown interest would hesitate the moment they noticed the subtle swell of her belly, offering vague excuses or politely stating that they had decided to go with another candidate. At home, Marcus watched her struggle, his own frustration building with each passing day. He knew Amelia deserved better, deserved more than the indignity of being cast aside after years of loyalty and hard work. While she focused on finding a new position, Marcus quietly began putting a plan into motion. Marcus Johnson was not just a supportive husband, he was a strategist. His background in finance had given him a deep understanding of corporate structures, investments, and the subtle mechanics of power. For years, he had been studying the industry, investing wisely, and building connections in the business world. He had always approached his work with precision and patience, and now he intended to use those skills to help his wife. Late one evening, after Amelia had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone in their home office surrounded by stacks of financial reports and a laptop glowing with spreadsheets. He had spent hours researching Arctech dynamics, poring over public filings, shareholder records, and market analyses. The company's financials were solid, but he noticed patterns that hinted at vulnerabilities, over-reliance on certain clients, a lack of investment in employee development, and a troubling pattern of turnover among key staff. These weaknesses, he realized, could be leveraged. But Marcus wasn't just looking for cracks in the company's armor. He was also exploring ways to gain a foothold. Over the years, he had quietly accumulated shares in various tech firms, including Arctech Dynamics. His stake was modest, but enough to give him a seat at the table if the opportunity arose. And now, with Amelia's unjust dismissal as the catalyst, he was ready to make his move. The next morning, over breakfast, Marcus decided to share his plan with Amelia. She was sitting at the kitchen table, cradling a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes distant. The strain of the past weeks was evident in the way her shoulders slumped and her smile no longer reached her eyes. "Amelia," Marcus began, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at Arctech, and I want you to know something. This isn't over. Not for me." She looked at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I've been watching that company for years," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and I've been investing in it, slowly but steadily. I have enough shares now to start making moves, but I'm not stopping there. I want to do more than just sit in a meeting. I want to take control." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Marcus, are you serious? That's a massive undertaking. Do you really think it's possible?" He nodded. "I do. I've done the research and I know where they're vulnerable. More importantly, I know what kind of leader Richard Hudson is. He's short-sighted, arrogant, and he's made a lot of enemies. If I play this right, I can gain enough support to make a real difference, not just for you but for everyone who's been hurt by his leadership." Amelia felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, hope, and a flicker of skepticism. "I don't even know what to say. You're doing this for me?" "For you, for us, and for what's right," Marcus said. "But I need you to believe in this too. It's going to take time and it's going to take work, but I won't let him get away with what he did to you." Amelia reached across the table, squeezing his hand tightly. "I believe in you, Marcus. I always have." From that moment, the wheels were set in motion. Marcus began reaching out to his network of investors and financial advisors, quietly building alliances and increasing his stake in Arctech Dynamics. He attended shareholder meetings, posing thoughtful questions and gaining the attention of other stakeholders who were dissatisfied with the company's direction under Richard Hudson. At the same time, he continued to gather evidence of Richard's poor leadership and questionable decisions, creating a dossier that could be used to sway opinion when the time came. Meanwhile, Amelia focused on her health and preparing for their baby. Though her job search remained difficult, she found solace in the small joys of pregnancy. The first fluttering kicks, the sound of the baby's heartbeat during checkups, and the way Marcus would talk to her belly, his voice filled with love and anticipation. One bright morning, as Amelia was organizing the nursery, Marcus came into the room holding his phone, a triumphant smile on his face. "It's happening," he said. "I've secured enough support to call for a leadership vote at Arctech." Amelia stared at him, her heart racing. "What does that mean?" "It means Richard's days as CEO are numbered," Marcus said. "We're going to change everything, Amelia. And when it's over, you're going to walk back into that company, not as an employee, but as someone they can't ignore." Amelia felt tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. Together, they were not just rebuilding their lives, they were preparing to create something better, a future where fairness and integrity would triumph over greed and arrogance. The battle wasn't won yet, but they were ready. With Marcus leading the charge and Amelia standing by his side, the foundations of Arctech Dynamics were about to be shaken to their core. The day of reckoning at Arctech Dynamics dawned with a sense of quiet inevitability. For months, Marcus had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, navigating the labyrinth of corporate politics and assembling a coalition of shareholders who shared his vision for change. His calm determination had turned skeptics into allies, and his carefully gathered evidence against Richard Hudson had become an unignorable force. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the company's grand conference room, a space that symbolized power and authority. Marcus arrived early, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. His calm demeanor belied the storm he was about to unleash. He had prepared meticulously for this moment, his every move calculated to ensure Richard Hudson's unseating. Richard, on the other hand, had no idea what was coming. He strode into the room with his usual air of arrogance, greeting the gathered shareholders with a self-assured smile. He had survived countless challenges during his tenure, and he saw no reason to believe today would be any different. The room quickly filled with stakeholders, board members, and senior executives. Amelia, though not physically present, had been Marcus's constant source of strength throughout this process. As he took his seat near the head of the table, he thought of her and their unborn child. This was for them, for the countless employees who had suffered under Richard's rule, and for the integrity of the company itself. When the meeting was called to order, Richard launched into his usual opening remarks. He spoke confidently about the company's recent performance, glossing over the growing discontent among employees and investors. Marcus allowed him to speak, knowing that the weight of the evidence he carried would soon make Richard's words meaningless. As the meeting progressed, Marcus waited for the perfect moment to interject. When Richard opened the floor for questions, Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady and composed. "I'd like to address a concern that has come to my attention," he began. "Specifically, the lack of transparency in the company's financial dealings under your leadership." The room fell silent. Richard's confident smile faltered for a split second before he recovered, his tone dismissive. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mr. Johnson. Arctech Dynamics has always adhered to the highest standards of financial integrity." Marcus met Richard's gaze unflinchingly. "Then you won't mind if I share some findings from an independent audit I commissioned." He placed a thick folder on the table, its contents meticulously organized. Inside were documents detailing years of questionable expenditures, mismanagement of funds, and outright fraud. Marcus had traced these discrepancies back to Richard, connecting the dots in a way that left no room for doubt. Gasps rippled through the room as the shareholders began flipping through the evidence. Murmurs of disbelief and outrage filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment. Richard's composure began to crack. "This is preposterous," he said, his voice rising. "You have no authority to conduct such an audit, and I won't stand for baseless accusations." "These aren't baseless," Marcus countered, his tone unshakable. "Every document in that folder is verified, and if you need further proof, I've also gathered testimonies from employees who have witnessed or been affected by your unethical practices." At that moment, one of the board members, an older man who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. "Richard, I've been with this company for decades, and I've seen my share of leadership challenges, but I can't ignore what's in front of me. We need to address this." The tide had turned. Richard's usual tactics of intimidation and denial were no longer effective. One by one, the shareholders began voicing their concerns, questioning his judgment, and demanding accountability. Richard's defenses crumbled as the weight of the evidence against him became undeniable. Finally, the board chairwoman, a woman with a commanding presence and a reputation for fairness, called for a vote of no confidence. The outcome was swift and decisive. Richard Hudson was removed as CEO. As he was escorted from the room, his face a mask of humiliation and anger, Marcus felt a surge of vindication. But his work wasn't finished. With Richard gone, he now had the opportunity to implement real change. Marcus stood at the head of the table, addressing the shareholders and executives who remained. Arctech Dynamics has always had the potential to be a leader in this industry, not just in innovation, but in how we treat our people. It's time to rebuild this company on a foundation of integrity, respect, and fairness. Together, we can create a workplace where employees feel valued and empowered, and where success is measured not just by profits, but by the impact we have on our community. The room erupted into applause, a mix of relief and hope filling the air. For the first time in years, the future of Arctech Dynamics looked bright. That evening, Marcus returned home to Amelia, his heart light with the knowledge that they had taken the first step toward justice. She met him at the door, her smile radiant despite the fatigue of the past weeks. "It's done," he said simply, pulling her into his arms. "Richard's gone, and we're going to make this right." Amelia felt a swell of pride and gratitude. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that things were truly changing, not just for them, but for everyone who had been affected by Richard's greed and arrogance. As they sat together in their living room, Marcus outlined his plans for the future of the company. Amelia listened intently, her hand resting on her belly where their child stirred gently. They were building something bigger than themselves, a legacy of fairness, compassion, and resilience. And this was only the beginning. With Richard Hudson's departure, Arctech Dynamics was poised for transformation. Marcus Johnson wasted no time implementing changes that would redefine the company's culture and restore its integrity. But for him, this wasn't just about restructuring a corporation. It was about creating a workplace where people like Amelia could thrive without fear of bias or retaliation. The first weeks of Marcus's leadership were a whirlwind of activity. He began by holding town hall meetings with employees at all levels, inviting them to share their concerns and suggestions for improving the company. Many were hesitant at first, their voices timid after years of being silenced under Richard's authoritarian rule. But Marcus's open and respectful demeanor gradually encouraged them to speak up. Amelia, now in the later stages of her pregnancy, had been watching these developments from the sidelines, her emotions a mix of pride and cautious optimism. Marcus had often sought her input during the process, knowing her deep understanding of the company's dynamics and her unique perspective as someone who had suffered under its previous leadership. Her insights proved invaluable as Marcus began crafting new policies to protect employees and promote inclusivity. One morning, Marcus sat across from Amelia at their kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about how employees need more than just policies. They need to know the company genuinely values them." Amelia nodded. "It's not just about avoiding lawsuits or bad press. People need to feel seen and supported. That's what keeps them motivated and loyal." "I couldn't agree more," Marcus said. He slid a document toward her. "This is a draft of the new parental leave policy. I wanted you to be the first to see it." Amelia picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the text. The new policy extended paid parental leave to 6 months, included options for flexible work schedules, and provided access to childcare services on site. It also included protections for pregnant employees to ensure they wouldn't face discrimination or undue pressure. "This is incredible," Amelia said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's exactly what people need. What I needed." Marcus reached for her hand. "It's because of you, Amelia. Your strength and resilience inspired all of this." The following week, Marcus made a public announcement about the changes during a company-wide meeting. Employees gathered in the bright, open atrium of the office building, the atmosphere buzzing with curiosity and anticipation. Marcus stood at the podium, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Today marks a new chapter for Arctech Dynamics," he began. "For too long, this company has operated in a way that prioritized profits over people. That ends now. We're introducing policies that reflect our commitment to you, the employees who make this company what it is." He outlined the key initiatives: enhanced parental leave, flexible work options, increased focus on diversity and inclusion, and robust mechanisms for addressing workplace grievances. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted throughout the atrium, and for the first time in years, the energy in the building felt hopeful and uplifting. Among the attendees was Jenna, one of Amelia's former colleagues, who had quietly struggled under Richard's leadership. She approached Marcus after the announcement, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for caring. It means more than you know." Marcus smiled warmly. "This is just the beginning. And it's not just my work. It's the result of people like Amelia, who've shown what real leadership looks like. Later that day, Marcus extended an offer to Amelia to return to the company, not just as an employee, but as a senior manager overseeing the implementation of these new initiatives. The title was more than symbolic. It was a recognition of her contributions and a chance for her to help shape the company's future. When Amelia walked back into the office for the first time since her dismissal, she was greeted with a standing ovation from her former colleagues. The sight brought tears to her eyes, a mix of relief, pride, and a deep sense of validation. She had come full circle, returning not as a victim, but as a leader. Over the next few months, Amelia and Marcus worked side by side to turn their vision into reality. The sterile, oppressive atmosphere that had once defined Architect Dynamics began to fade, replaced by a culture of collaboration, respect, and inclusivity. The company introduced mentorship programs, mental health resources, and workshops on unconscious bias. Employees who had once been afraid to speak up now felt empowered to contribute their ideas. One of the most transformative changes was the creation of a new space in the office, a bright, inviting daycare center where employees could bring their children. It was a visible reminder of the company's commitment to supporting families, and it quickly became a beloved feature among staff. Amelia, meanwhile, found herself thriving in her new role. Balancing work and her pregnancy was challenging, but the flexible schedule and supportive environment made it manageable. She often reflected on how far she had come, from feeling discarded and defeated to standing at the forefront of meaningful change. As her due date approached, Amelia began preparing for maternity leave, knowing the company would continue to flourish under the systems she and Marcus had put in place. On her final day before leave, she received a surprise. A card, signed by dozens of employees, each message thanking her for her leadership and the positive impact she had made. That evening, as she sat at home with Marcus, she held the card in her hands, her heart full. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did." Marcus smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "This is just the start, Amelia. The best is yet to come." The foundation they had laid at Architect Dynamics was more than just a victory for them. It was a promise to future generations that businesses could succeed without sacrificing compassion and humanity. Together, they had transformed a place of fear into a place of hope, proving that change was not only possible, but worth fighting for. Spring had arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal and hope. The nursery in Amelia and Marcus's home was ready, its soft yellow walls adorned with tiny stars and clouds. The room felt warm and welcoming, a reflection of the love and anticipation that had gone into preparing for the arrival of their child. Amelia was now on maternity leave, her days filled with moments of rest, reflection, and preparation. Marcus, ever the attentive husband, had adjusted his schedule to spend more time at home, ensuring that she had everything she needed. Though his responsibilities as CEO of Architect Dynamics were demanding, he remained unwavering in his support for Amelia and their growing family. On a bright morning in late April, Amelia woke up with a sense of calm anticipation. The day seemed ordinary at first. Marcus brought her breakfast in bed, and they spent a quiet morning reading together. But by midday, the first gentle contractions began, signaling that their daughter was ready to make her entrance into the world. The hours that followed were a blur of excitement and intensity. Marcus stayed by Amelia's side through every step, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement and marveling at her strength. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their daughter, Emma Grace Johnson was born. Her first cries filled the room, a sound that brought tears to the eyes of both her parents. "She's perfect," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he cradled Emma in his arms. He handed her to Amelia, who gazed at their daughter with a mixture of awe and overwhelming love. "She's our miracle," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Everything we've been through, it was all worth it for her." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment and joy. Their days were punctuated by late-night feedings, soft lullabies, and moments of quiet wonder as they watched Emma sleep. Despite the exhaustion, Amelia and Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude for this new chapter in their lives. Amelia's colleagues and friends from Arctech Dynamics rallied around her, sending gifts, flowers, and heartfelt messages of congratulations. Many of them reflected on how Amelia's journey had inspired them, not just as a professional, but as a person who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Jenna, now thriving under the new leadership, sent a handwritten letter that brought tears to Amelia's eyes. "You showed us what courage looks like," Jenna wrote. "Because of you, I believe in myself in a way I never did before. Thank you for being the leader we all needed." As Marcus balanced his duties at the company with his role as a new father, he often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Under his leadership, Arctech Dynamics had continued to flourish, earning recognition not just for its innovative products, but for its commitment to ethical business practices. The company had become a beacon of hope in the corporate world, a shining example of what could be achieved when people were valued as much as profits. The changes they had implemented were already making a tangible difference. Employee turnover had decreased, productivity had risen, and the atmosphere in the office had transformed. The once sterile halls now echoed with friendly chatter, and the daycare center was always filled with the laughter of children. Arctech Dynamics had become more than a workplace. It was a community. One evening, as Amelia rocked Emma to sleep in the cozy nursery, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She thought about the challenges they had faced, the moments of doubt and fear, and the strength it had taken to keep moving forward. Holding Emma close, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that their struggles had not been in vain. "Your mom's a fighter, Emma," Amelia whispered softly, "and so are you. We're going to show you a world where kindness and fairness matter, and you'll always know how much you're loved." Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them with a smile. "She's lucky to have you as her mom," he said, walking over to wrap his arms around both of them. "And I'm lucky to have you too." In the months that followed, Amelia gradually transitioned back into her role at Arctech Dynamics. With the support of the company's flexible policies, she was able to balance her responsibilities as a mother and a leader. Emma became a familiar face in the daycare center, and her giggles often brightened the days of everyone in the office. Amelia's desk, once a symbol of quiet resilience, was now a testament to triumph and transformation. Photos of Emma adorned the space, alongside a collection of thank you notes from colleagues and employees whose lives she had touched. The story of Amelia and Marcus's journey spread beyond the walls of Arctech Dynamics, capturing the attention of the business world. Articles were written, interviews were conducted, and their story became a powerful example of how adversity could be turned into opportunity. Companies across the country began reevaluating their own policies, inspired by the changes at Arctech. For Amelia and Marcus, however, the greatest reward wasn't the accolades or the recognition. It was the knowledge that they had created a better future for their daughter. They had shown Emma and the world that standing up for what was right could lead to something beautiful. As the seasons changed and Emma grew, their lives settled into a rhythm of joy and purpose. Each morning, as Amelia walked into work, she felt a renewed sense of pride. The halls that had once been filled with fear and tension were now alive with possibility, a testament to the power of resilience and hope. And each evening, as they tucked Emma into bed, Amelia and Marcus would sit together, reflecting on the journey they had shared. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their family and their values intact. Together, they had built something worth fighting for, a legacy of love, integrity, and unwavering belief in a better tomorrow. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Be sure to check out our other videos and share this one with your friends. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.